For anyone who's unfamiliar, my name is Ben Woosley, and I believe no Liberty project is going better or closer to completion than unseating the Federal Reserve. So let's talk about that. To give a sense of what's ahead, first I want to share a bit of my story for context on my thinking. Then I'll look back to a few recent events, the Argentinian presidential election and the Bitcoin ETF. And then we'll look ahead as to what to expect in the Bitcoin halving and future tech developments. Let me just start a timer so that I don't overrun my time here. Thank you. Okay. So, here we go. I got my start in 2007 with Ron Paul's presidential campaign. He impressed upon me the significance of the inflationary dollar and its role in impoverishing the public, fueling destructive warfare, subverting federalism by enabling the federal government to bribe the states, enabling out-of-control deficit spending, and fueling the out-of-control growth of government. So the prospect was clear. We'd be more peaceful, more resilient, more fair, more prosperous without it. How could we get there while the incentives of government weigh against its elimination? So later through this conference, I learned of Bernard von Nothaus's Liberty Dollar, which presents a simple answer, which is to opt out. This is what Ayn Rand articulated in Atlas Shrugged, and Samuel Konkin described in Agorism, a powerful choice, creating or supporting an alternative that can one day replace what is left. I acquired and still own some of the coins they minted, but years later, the federal government arrested von Nothaus on criminal charges of counterfeiting and fraudulently selling these Liberty Dollars. At trial, it took the jury only 90 minutes to convict him. This was a hard lesson. Go up against the government and they will arrest you, put you on trial, and attempt to imprison you for over a decade. Around the same time, the Bitcoin white paper was quietly released to a crypto-anarchist mailing list. Learning the lesson of von Nothaus, it was published pseudonymously and architected such that there was no single neck to choke. The first encounter that I had with Bitcoin was years later in 2011, watching a 5-minute Ignite talk by Gavin Andresen called Making Money. I recommend it if you want a kind of historical reference. And in that he said, "It's a brand new baby currency worth about $3 million so far. I don't know where it's going to go, but there's a small possibility that in 50 years, it just might replace the dollar as the world's reserve currency." Here we are, 13 years later. Bitcoin's value is about $1.4 trillion. 37 years to go. Later, in 2017, I came across the video of Joseph Poon and Taj Dryja presenting on their Lightning Network white paper with the takeaway that with the Lightning Network, Bitcoin can scale to accommodate the global economy within a few orders of magnitude, whereas big blocks would require multi-gigabyte blocks to do the same, so intractable. This made clear to me that Bitcoin could practically become the single global reserve currency. At the same time, in 2017, ICOs were booming. In San Francisco, where I lived at the time, everyone and their mother seemed to be launching a new coin. It's understandable. People were just following the incentives in front of them. Create a coin, get rich. But you can ask, how many of these are meaningful now? My impression was that these incentives could result in everyone dividing their time across thousands of projects and so dilute our combined effort towards our common goals, reducing our chance of success overall, something like the opposite of the Free State Project. Whereas here we join together to magnify our effect. The ICOs threaten to divide us ad infinitum. So I resolved to support Bitcoin, which I judged then as now to be the most likely to reach global reserve currency status. Since 2017, I've been working in the Bitcoin space, contributing to Bitcoin Core, which is the reference node implementation. And I do this because I believe in the historical import of the project. But now let's look at a few current events to show how things are developing in this moment. So I think many of us are watching the Argentinian situation with the election of Milei. I've been watching it, and I've been lucky to be able to spend about 2 months in Buenos Aires since October. Argentina is a standout in the inflation landscape. Over the past 2 years, their exchange rate with the dollar has sextupled. In the prior 3 years, it quadrupled, from 100 to 1,200 pesos per dollar. Here's an example. Let's see if I can start this. It's a video I'm trying to play. There you go. Here's an example of how they deal with their money. That's 100,000 pesos at a time, counted out. There we go. Here's an example of how much you might have to carry around. To carry around requires a fanny pack or something similar. So in this context, a firebrand reformer was elected, not least on a message of demonizing money printing in the central bank. For example, he said, "The disaster in which the country finds itself is no coincidence. Rather, it is a conscious and planned scheme involving an intimate relationship between the privileges of politics and the discomfort of common Argentines. It drives high public spending, fiscal deficit, debt, and money printing," and so on. "This business protected by lies is the regrettable material and spiritual state of the nation." So it applies here. The people of Argentina elected him by historic margins, and now he's the only national leader who is an avowed anarcho-capitalist. The first lesson in his success, I think, is the lesson of populism. He succeeded in part because he connected his economic analysis with an emotional argument. Not every voter is going to be a deep-thinking, rational actor. The people also need to be inspired. So, what does Argentina have to do with the dollar? Milei is advocating for dollarization, which is to say, shutting down the central bank and replacing it with the U.S. dollar, or monetary freedom, in which the people choose what currency to use. And so in the short term, this would tend to increase the power of the dollar by expanding its reach. On the other hand, it follows this path that Bitcoiners generally expect, which is that the fiat currencies will fall one by one, and the dollar will be the last to fall. Excuse me. So, one of the things one group of the people that I got familiar with over there is this group, which is La Crypta. It's a co-working space / company. They're building tools, and they're hanging out and enjoying themselves as well. And so, an example, here's a video I'd like to play. If you could click. So this is a point of sale device. It's NFC and QR enabled, and it's for use in retail, and it's consistent with the existing kind of user experience, but it's powered by Lightning, and it uses Nostr as a backend, so it has a kind of public data infrastructure. This is a device which is aimed at being a tip collecting device that you would put on a bar. And you could, again, tap in with NFC and make that contribution. So this is the idea of building out, making the tools such that the experience is seamless, that is consistent with their existing experience, that enables easy adoption. So I expect a lot to come of Argentina, and through a combination of their experience with Bitcoin and their monetary changes. Next up, we have the approval of the Bitcoin ETFs. This is a depiction of the financial flows into exchange-traded funds relative to Bitcoin. So that has increased dramatically in the most recent quarter. And then you can see it's also increasing here. This is the aggregate funds, or rather, I think this is the aggregate funds. So you have a decline in GBTC and an increase in the ETFs. So a good way to think about these funds is as a new category of long-term treasury holder, alongside corporate, exchange, and government holders. It's an easy on-ramp that anyone with a retirement account can access without signing up for a new account. Like, I talked to my Uber driver this morning, and I was like, you could do this. It's also potentially tax advantage. That's one of the reasons I take advantage of it. So this is a big development. Obviously, it means Wall Street is also now invested and participating in the Bitcoin economy, and so they can advocate as well on its behalf. But there's a lot that I'm also looking forward to. Oh, actually, here's another example that isn't in my notes. So prior to this past year, NFTs were only on other chains until some people created new systems for doing that on Bitcoin. And they're somewhat controversial among Bitcoiners. My theory is that it's not for any one person to decide how people use Bitcoin. It's for each individual. And so if people want to use Bitcoin for NFTs, more power to them. But this is one example or one step in a general theme, I think, which is that as Bitcoin is developing in a layered system of systems, it will accumulate the capabilities that some of which are already existing in other chains. Excuse me. I've been suffering a bit this week, as some of you have noticed. All right, so what's next? The halving. So this coming month is the 4th halving that's ever occurred for Bitcoin. And is anyone unfamiliar with the halving and how it operates? Can you raise your hand if you're not? Okay, great. So initially there was 0 Bitcoin. You have to introduce Bitcoin to the market somehow. The way it has been introduced over time has been through the block reward. Every block that's mined rewards the miner with a certain amount of Bitcoin. In the beginning, it was 50 Bitcoin. And then 4 years later, there was a halving, and it became 25. In the current halving, it's going down to 3.125. So historically, this is kind of the halvings charted out. Historically, halvings have preceded significant run-ups in the price of Bitcoin. And why does this happen? It's because the miners are selling a lot of the Bitcoin that they mine, and they need to pay their costs, for example. And so if they're, excuse me, if they have less to sell, the sell side pressure reduces, and so the price is bid up. Here's the cycles charted against one another. So you can see the blue line is the first halving, the orange line is the second, and the green line is the most recent one. Something that's interesting to note about this history is that the most recent halving occurred during COVID and was probably truncated. This is why you see it doesn't have a blow-off top. Instead, it's kind of muddled. So that is a possible explanation for why we're at an all-time high currently when we're not usually at an all-time high before the halving. So it remains to be seen how the red line, which is our current cycle, will continue. But I don't see a reason why it wouldn't follow the pattern set in these other examples. Another interesting angle on the halving is that with every halving, Bitcoin's stock-to-flow ratio shifts higher because there's less flow, less Bitcoin being produced. And you can compare the stock-to-flow ratios of various assets as a measure of their sort of monetary capability in theory. So in the past, originally Bitcoin was being introduced at a rate higher than silver was being mined. And then now that was, excuse me. But that was exceeded in 2015, whereas in the current halving, we're going to exceed the stock-to-flow ratio of gold. So Bitcoin exceeded, and Bitcoin also passed silver's market value this year. So that was a rise from $400 to $60,000 over 10 years. Whereas the current ratio of Bitcoin's value to gold's value is much lower. So it's only one order of magnitude. So it remains to be seen what period of time it will require to exceed gold's value. So next, I can talk a little bit about the tech, so I don't have much time. So I mentioned the sort of layered approach that Bitcoin operates on. It maintains the simplicity of Bitcoin as a core system. People are generally familiar with the Lightning Network, I imagine, which is a system for highly scalable transactions, which is built on top of Bitcoin, relies on its underlying capabilities, but is an entirely different decentralized system. So there are a couple of other systems that are coming out, which are layers or other systems that interact with the existing layers. One example is Fediment. Fediment is a system for, it's based on something defined by David Choum, who's a noted cryptographer. And it's basically on the idea of, you can imagine it as a, actually, I'm gonna punt on describing these technology developments. I'll just cite them as examples. You can research them if you're interested. I'm out of time for my component. So if anyone has any questions, I can try to answer those now, and then we'll hand off to the others. The systems I wanted to describe are Fediment and Taproot Assets. Taproot Assets is a system for coining arbitrary assets and transacting them through Bitcoin and the Lightning Network, which enables you to do stable coins, NFTs, and other things like securitizing real estate. And ultimately, I think the future I expect is that everyone will pay whatever they have to pay with, and the recipient will receive whatever they prefer to receive, and the exchange between currency pairs will occur automatically in a decentralized fashion using a multi-asset system like Taproot Assets. So that's the kind of development I expect over the next 5 years. And then finally, we know, here's the debt accumulating over time, $1 trillion per band. We know it's gonna continue, so here it goes. Thank you.
Is there any future for retail or point of sale systems that are not KYC compliant?
Yeah, so as you do, like when you build Taproot Assets as a decentralized system, it's like Bitcoin such that you just need a node to interact with it. And so there's no gatekeeper because you can access it from anywhere via the internet. So the government doesn't have a way to force you to use KYC in that context. They don't have a particular, unless they're going to your retail location, looking at the systems you're using at the point of sale, doing that kind of thing. So it's a much more difficult to control system because it is decentralized and universally accessible.
Thank you. Would you like to haul a Scott truck?
I would appreciate one, sure. Thank you. Anyone else?
Are you still getting set up? All right.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Hey everyone. I guess I'm the filibuster for the day. I'm here to brought up to run out the clock while we figure out the technical particulars of Chris's presentation. Yeah, I'm being told to be louder and more obnoxious. Is this loud and obnoxious enough? Just fine? Just as loud, less obnoxious? I don't know if I can guarantee that. Well, anyway, hey everyone. My name is Joel Valenzuela, and I've been in the crypto world for about 12 years now or so. I was homeschooled, and as part of that, you kind of come away, if it's done right, with an understanding of how money is fake these days, about the gold standard, about the true value of sound money, etc. I'm I'm not a particularly bright person, but I am a very impatient person. So starting around 2010, 2011, I was thinking about how can I try to, if I don't want to wait for someone to get the political capital to figure out how to re-implement a gold standard. That's kind of where a lot of the libertarian movement was at the time, was gold standard, let's figure out how to make it happen, but like super unrealistic. It would happen in my lifetime ever. And so I was trying to still figure out how I could live off of gold. And a figure who's, I guess big in the libertarian world, but a little bit antagonistic to the crypto world these days, Peter Schiff, he had this gold-backed debit card he was offering. Unfortunately, the government shut down his bank recently, but that's of less consequence to me today. But like in 2011, 2012, I was like, how can I get one of these gold-backed debit cards? I want to have all my money in gold and then just swipe the card and it converts to dollars, and then that would be the dream. And it's kind of funny how far we are from that today. But so I moved up to New Hampshire in 2013. On my drive over, I met with a friend for pizza in Chicago. Pizza is kind of a sacred food in the Bitcoin world, and he paid me back for his portion of the pizza in Bitcoin, and that was the first Bitcoin I ever received. And since then, I don't believe I've ever bought any cryptocurrencies ever. I've only ever received them as compensation for goods and services. And this is a pretty, my story is pretty well documented at this time. Even CNN did a little thing, which doesn't mean it's fake just because they did it. But basically, I'm kind of inspired by what Tulsi Gabbard was talking about not too long ago at the end about the CBDCs, the central bank digital currency, which is a very clear concept. It's a little vague as far as what the implementation looks like. I would argue we're kind of under that regime right now because we all have a central bank issued coin, the US dollar. We transact with it digitally. And every financial transaction of ours is quite surveilled. And quite controlled, and people can have their accounts shut off on a whim. However, it can and will unfortunately get a lot worse. So starting in 2015, I decided I wasn't going to earn any fiat currency ever again. And so since then, I've been paid exclusively in cryptocurrency, still to this day. In 2016, I closed my bank account. And part of this was because, again, I'm impatient, right? I want the future now. I don't want it later when, maybe the dollar collapses someday. But the other part is, there's a lot of talking out there. I wanted to find out for myself. And it's not something you try once and then you just, I know. No, it's something you have to keep on doing over and over to really understand where you're going. And so today, I'm really happy with the state of cryptocurrency and all its, the great news, the adoption. It's almost a $3 trillion market cap for all the decentralized crypto assets together today. It's growing over and over. The one thing I would say is I'd like to invite some critical thinking, right? We have to think about what are our goals here? I know there's a lot of people who got attached, for example, myself, my past self, got attached to the idea of like a gold standard, for example. Saying, gold is great, we're going to use gold and this and that. And then when they saw new free money come out and they determined, that could be a threat to gold, no, gold's the only good stuff. That stuff's all a scam. It's not backed by anything, whatever. We have to remember that all of this is just meaningless. All of this is just a tool for freedom. That's all that matters. Maybe this is tyranny form and people don't really agree with me, but I think most people here agree that the goal is liberty, right? The goal is to separate money from state. The goal is to give radical financial freedom to anyone in the world. So, show of hands real quick. Who earns at least 10% of their income now I'm talking about investments, income, in a non-government controlled money of any kind? So we got like around 3, and that's like at least 10%. Now let's get up to 50%. Anyone? There we go. Are you a 100%er or are you just 50 to somewhere in that range? Perfect. Listen. Yeah, that's great. Well, hey, you get a fresh slate to start from. But the point is, so the point is, we can easily see that almost all of us are today in 2024, 15 years after the Bitcoin revolution started this whole thing. Almost all of us are completely dependent on the system that we all acknowledge, or hopefully, at least by the end of this talk, I should scare you enough. We're all hopelessly dependent on a system that is going to rug pull us at any moment, was crypto term for just take it all out from under us to just, we can all be censored at any time, meaning most of us, I should say. We can all have our value diluted to zero, which is what's happening because of inflation. And so what I would encourage people to do is to start living the practice, not necessarily, yes, because it's important eventually to start living on free money, but also to actually investigate some things, to actually know what works, what doesn't, what's true, what isn't, who's trying to sell you something, some nonsense, and who's telling the truth, because everyone's telling you things, and you can look at research papers all you want, things like that. I'd encourage people to do their own investigation, do your own research. Oh, as long as that's still allowed, right? So 3 big questions that I'd like you guys to ask yourselves on a continual basis as far as the money's concerned, right? 1, is the value and supply of the money that you have determined by any one central entity, like a government, a central bank, or an entity that can then say, oh, there couldn't be more of these or whatever? Or do you know exactly how many of these things that you own are out there, these units of account? 2, do you have full control over your own money? So for example, for prop purposes, I keep a couple coins, people still, these, no one can confiscate these from me because unless they hit me over the head and reach into my pockets, right? So I would call this fully in my possession. Bank account, not so much, right? They just snap their fingers, you never get to access that again. So the second question is, in cryptocurrency, a big point of that is you can custody your own money. You can hold on to your own money, and no one can take that from you. It can also be in someone else's custody. Like if you sign up for a Coinbase account or Strike or whatever else, and then you got all your money with a custodian, they could also take it all away from you. So, second, is the money that you have in your full possession? And then the final question, which is unfortunately the hardest one to solve today, but it's still doable, right? Is your ability to access and transact tied to your government-issued identity? Or is it like cash in your pocket where just you got it? And who's you? I don't know. Whoever owns this private key collection, whatever. Those are those 3 questions I'd like you to continue to ask yourselves on a continuing basis. Because if you use decentralized cryptocurrencies, you can successfully answer the right way for all those questions. You can also think you're using cryptocurrency and fail all those 3 questions. You can have a currency that's centrally controlled somewhere, like say, for example, I'm a big fan of the temporary tool that is a stable coin, which is a digital token representing US dollars, but it's still US dollars, right? It's a great, useful tool, but it's not, in my opinion, what you should have your life savings in, right? And then you can also have money in a purely custodial system where a company holds your money for you, even though it's freedom money or Bitcoin, whatever it is. A company's holding it for you and they can begrudge that to you. And then the final thing is, do you actually have privacy? And the biggest one is, do you have money that's not tied to your government identity? And the next thing, I'm sure Chris will touch a little bit on this, even if it's not directly tied to that, if you don't have actual privacy in the technology of the tool you're using, then some intelligence agency, not even that, just some analytics company can just do a couple clicks and be like, all right, here's the transaction graph, here's this. We tied it to this email address, which we know is associated with, even though it's, hotpotato59 or whatever, hotmail.com, even though it's not tied to your real name, they know, oh yeah, that guy signed up for this, and okay, we know who that is. So those are the 3 questions. Remember those 3 questions. One last time, and then I'll get out of here, right? 1, Is your currency that you're using, are the units of it, is it able to be inflated or devalued or whatever by a central entity? That's question number one. Question number two, is it in your direct control and possession? Do you need anyone else's permission or compliance in order to access your own money? And then the third one is it tied to your identity directly, where if you decide to transact, a government or company can say, no, that guy's on the blacklist. He can't spend that money. Don't take money from him. Or do you actually have privacy? And these are not, we cannot expect perfection from these, but these are principles. These are questions we should ask ourselves and move towards. The goal is separation of money and state. The goal is liberty. How are we doing on that goal? Think about that.
Any questions for Joel?
Very good ad-libbing there. I'll take this. All right, let me make sure this works. All right.
And I'll be happy to answer questions now, but also just later. I'm around. I'm at a thing at 3:30 as well. So I'll be around all day. Just feel free to just accost me, non-consensually.
All right. My name is Chris. I'm, I guess by way of background, for a number of years I was lead developer on a project called Open Bazaar. I don't know if any of you guys remember that name in the history of cryptocurrency. Was also one of the handful of developers that helped get Bitcoin Cash off the ground. So I was kind of fighting the scaling wars, maybe on the opposite side of Ben a little bit here. But I'm going to talk about a new project I've been working on for a couple years. I guess maybe in the context of the general theme of this talk. It's called Ilium. It's a new cryptocurrency, completely brand new. I've been writing it all from scratch. If you asked me, a couple years ago would I be working on a new cryptocurrency, I would have said there's no way, because there's thousands of cryptocurrencies by this point, and coming up with a new idea for a cryptocurrency or something novel it's extremely difficult. It's like, I don't know, trying to come up with like $1 million business idea, right? It's just all the good ones are already taken. And this idea came about because there's been some pretty significant advances in the field of cryptography, and just in recent years. We'll talk about in a second here. I mean, some of this is like really bleeding edge stuff that's only possible like today. So it wouldn't be possible to build something like Ilium, even last year. So, first off, kind of how did we get here? I've got a slide here with the sort of history of cryptocurrency innovations. There was maybe a meme way back in the day. People used to say when you would tell them about Bitcoin, they would say, why is it not going to be the MySpace of cryptocurrency? The idea here being that something else is going to come along that has like better features that just sort of improves upon it. And my response at the time was, look, Bitcoin's open source. It's not fixed in stone. We can change it. So if somebody comes along with a better idea and it's proven to work really well, we can just incorporate that into Bitcoin. And I guess that's still theoretically possible, but the politics have proven intractable, right? Like getting any sort of changes into Bitcoin, certainly at the base layer, has made it almost impossible to get any sort of upgrades. And it's pushed a lot of the innovation off onto new cryptocurrencies. So this is just sort of kind of a little brief history of some of what I consider to be the major innovations over the years. Obviously, when Bitcoin came out, we all kind of knew it had some shortcomings. We just didn't really know how to address them. We put a lot of time and energy and thought into trying to figure out how to address them. And over the years, people have created new cryptocurrencies, improving on one aspect or another aspect of it, but not quite improving on everything. One of the big ones, what do I have there first? Proof of stake. So, Bitcoin, there's 190 countries in the world, and Bitcoin consumes more electricity than all but 25 of them, right? So, from the beginning, people were like, there's kind of got to be a better way of doing this where we're not just gobbling up huge amounts of electricity. And proof of stake came out pretty early on. Peercoin was the first one. And there's been some iterative designs on proof of stake. And even up to, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, I feel like most cryptocurrencies that were coming out were still proof of work, with the idea being that it's just like battle tested, right? We can trust that it's not going to be, hacked and attacked. But over the last number of years, we have Ethereum adopted proof of stake in 2020. None of these proof of stake coins have had any major security issues or problems. They've been running fine over the years. And people have really kind of developed a lot of confidence in it that we didn't have with proof of stake in the beginning, to the point where I think today you don't see any new cryptocurrencies coming to market using proof of work. It's like proof of stake has sort of reached that point of like being battle tested. Smart contracts, Bitcoin. If I were designing Bitcoin way back in 2009, I would not have included a scripting language, and I wouldn't even have thought to include a scripting language, and that was incredibly, foresighted by Satoshi to do so. But it was still very kind of primitive. You couldn't do sort of everything with it that you would want to do with a scripting language, and so Ethereum obviously is the big one there, that kind of created a more like a Turing complete scripting language, something that was, you could pretty much do anything you wanted with it, which sort of represented an advance over what you could do with Bitcoin. Private transactions, Bitcoin, obviously all your transactions are public. So when, Alice sends a transaction to Bob, you can see what are the equivalent of account numbers making the transfer on the blockchain. You can see the amount that is transferred. Monero was maybe one of the first big names to try and solve this. Monero's privacy was not perfect, but it was a good first step. I think Zcash probably did it the right way. Zcash was really forward-thinking. They used some really advanced cryptography called ZK snarks, which enables you to sort of build these like programmatic cryptographic proofs that are sort of at the core of the privacy technology in Zcash. The thing with Zcash, though, is it only did basic transfers, right? You could only transfer coins from Alice to Bob. You couldn't do like the more complex smart contracts that you have with, say, Ethereum or tokens or any of this other stuff in zero knowledge. It was just basic transfers. Avalanche, I think, maybe some might disagree on this. I like Avalanche as a technology. It provides for, it's like a proof of stake variant that provides for instant transaction finalization. I know part of the reason why I like this is a lot of us still have, me and Joel still have a dream of one day being able to, buy stuff with cryptocurrency from merchants, and having really fast transaction finalization is sort of critical to that. And most cryptocurrencies don't have that ability. You're usually waiting, 10 minutes for a confirmation or 30 seconds for a confirmation, whatever it is, and then you need more confirmations to build up a level of trust that it won't be reversed. And then, but with the Avalanche consensus algorithm, you pretty much get like instant transaction finalization. Pretty much as soon as the transaction's broadcast, it reaches a state of finality that it can't be reversed. So this would be good for things like, payments and stuff like this. And so just in the last couple years, I mentioned the ZK snarks with Zcash. ZK snarks were very difficult to use when they first came out. They're not very performant. They're very slow and super difficult to write. The idea is you could kind of like write a cryptographic proof in sort of like code or like a very low-level mathematical language, and then just super difficult to do. Like, for example, if you had an if block, if and else, like both sides needed to be executed. If you had a loop, you couldn't just break out of a loop at an arbitrary point. You had to calculate what is my max number of iterations and do all of them. So it made like doing any sort of like custom programmatic like smart contracts or stuff like this, I always thought it was going to be impossible to do with ZK snarks for this reason. But what we've had in just like the last 2 years or so is a lot of research come out on what's called like recursive ZK snarks, where a cryptographic proof can attest to the validity of another proof. So you can almost have kind of infinite recursion going back this way. And what it enables people to do is, I've got Lurk up here. Lurk is a Turing complete programming language for ZK snarks written by some guys. It was spun out of Protocol Labs. That Protocol Labs created Filecoin and IPFS. I've had a pretty close relationship with them over the years, so I tend to think like Lurk is the best, and they've really got like a world-class team of cryptographers here. But the idea is you have these like, you take your program that you want to write, break it up into small chunks. For every chunk, you use it as an input to this ZK snark circuit. You get a proof as the output. That proof then becomes an input to the next iteration, and you kind of step through your program this way until you get like a final proof. So you have basically a way to do like Turing complete computation in zero knowledge. And so I guess maybe my contribution here with Ilium is to kind of apply this in a way. I used some techniques that we kind of developed in Bitcoin Cash. We did things like transaction introspection and stuff like this. But we're able to do like full zero knowledge smart contracts in Ilium. So whereas with Zcash, we're just doing basic transfers, in Ilium, we can do the whole smart contract in zero knowledge, right? So you create your script, and the script gets executed inside this ZK snark circuit, and it doesn't leak any information. So we have, not only are we not leaking information about, say, who's sending coins to who, so you can't, you don't see Alice's address or Bob's address, you don't see the amounts, but you also don't even see the transaction type, right? So you can't tell, like, this is a basic transfer, this is a smart contract, this is a token. Everything just looks like an encrypted blob on the blockchain, which from a privacy standpoint, this is really like the holy grail. I think that this is ultimately, like, no other cryptocurrency's done this to this point, and I think that this is ultimately where we want to get to with privacy. And I've got it working right now. So
that's like eliminating metadata.
Yeah.
It's like a phone call happened.
Yeah, exactly. Yep, exactly. Yeah, for everything. So it also has some benefits to scalability. I put a little bit of an asterisk there, but when you think of like smart contracts on, say, Ethereum regulates your ability to do smart contracts by charging fees for the more computation you do. Because, if they didn't charge fees, the network would just grind to a halt with everybody trying to get their really resource-intensive smart contracts processed. With Ilium, because all transactions look the same, they all verify in constant time. So you can think of like just a basic transfer and the world's most complex smart contract. They all verify in the same amount of time. So we don't need gas fees, right? We don't have to charge people fees for how much computation you use and stuff like this. So that provides a pretty big scalability benefit. So ultimately, I think what we're kind of getting at here with Ilium, fast, cheap, fully private, scalable, Turing complete. In my opinion, this is like pretty close to like the holy grail of cryptocurrency. There's maybe a couple more things I'd like to see improved upon, but it's I think as close as it's come to this point. I showed the design to a friend of mine who's been in the space a very long time, and his response to me was like, he's like, this is as close to an optimal design of a cryptocurrency I've ever seen. So I'm pretty excited about it. This technology is, I'm not the only one, unfortunately, who has this idea. So there are other people who are kind of trying to do something similar. There's only maybe one other one, like Alio or something, who's trying to do it as a separate blockchain. A lot of them are trying to do it as like an Ethereum rollup or something like this. But we'll see. So I'm optimistic that this is going to do pretty well. I'm hoping that it's going to be available to be used by the end of the year. It's currently in like an alpha state. I still need to do a security audit on it. We're going to launch sort of like a beta test net, and then if everything goes well, maybe by the end of the year I'll have it released. So thank you. Good.
Any questions for Chris?
I heard about this like years ago. Friends of ours, I think Joel probably knows.
Oh, yeah.
Well, they were telling me about something called PIVX, which I believe stands for Private Instantly Verifiable Transaction. And it sounds a lot like what you're talking about. I don't know if you're aware of it or not, but I'm curious how those compare.
I don't know about it. You want to tell me?
Yeah, so PIVX has and Personal Norm, they're great people, right? PIVX has an optional zero knowledge transaction ability. It's not by default, it's an optional, and as far as I know, they don't have any computational things, no smart contract or anything like that. So yeah, it's just for obfuscating transaction amounts, and I believe they use a a derivative of Zcash's privacy. They kind of like ported over Sapling, I believe. Not the latest Zcash iteration, but one of those. But so yeah, it's purely for sending and receiving. It's not for the computation.
Yep. Aleo, I think. Something like that. ALELEO, something along those lines. It's one of these like VC coins. Like, I don't know. So I'm kind of waffling on like the best way to actually launch this because, you know, the SEC is pretty rogue and, you know, they've bankrupted Jeremy. And so, so I haven't taken any VC money, but Aleo, you look at like their coin distribution, it's like 90% goes to the VCs. And so I'm hoping to be able to do something better than that. I kind of would prefer this to be a little bit more of a grassroots coin. One, I don't really need the VC money to develop it. I mean, they raised like $200 million. I can tell you it doesn't take $200 million to build a blockchain. I mean, I've done it with $0.
Yeah, only if they're as smart as you, which not everyone is.
So
You got $200 million worth of monkeys.
yeah, so somebody's going to be a bag holder there. And I'm kind of hoping that this can be a little bit more of a grassroots thing. And I don't know, I mean, it's going to be a different approach because every coin that's launching today is doing it in a VC approach. And, you know, I don't know, maybe that's going to harm how it performs, you know, financially, or maybe it doesn't, right? Maybe people get really excited about it. We'll see. But, you know, I think one of the things that made Bitcoin really interesting was people sort of had the ability to front run the VCs, and I like that idea about it. So I'm kind of hoping to be able to do the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, with a fair launch, like a lot of people know the first Bitcoin transaction or the first block had a newspaper headline in it. That was to prove that that Satoshi didn't start mining before that date. So that he was proving it was a fair launch, everyone could mine, and it was equally accessible.
I don't know in what kind, like on another chain or its own chain.
So I know that with library, like the reason that you could target it was because you had a central, you know, like a physical location and everything was documented and all that. So like it was very easy to see like, okay, who's actually working on this, where do they live? Whereas with a decentralized autonomous organization, it's a lot harder to target the people working on it.
Yeah. As far as I can tell, the SEC doesn't have a whole lot of an issue with the someone just sort of creating a cryptocurrency and releasing it. Like they have more of an issue with raising money through VCs. They have an issue with like paying employees with it and stuff like this. So I'm kind of like, if I can sort of avoid that, then you know, hopefully that'll kind of be all right. I mean, there is some elements built into the protocol of like a decentralized treasury as sort of a way to kind of fund development and stuff like this. That is DAO-ish, that could maybe be used in that regard. But I think with Jeremy, there was like an actual, you know, company, and that could kind of be targeted. In my case, I don't really have a company. I mean, it's just, I mean, I'll get some of the coins myself, but, you know, but there's no like company there. 1 minute.
Yeah, go ahead. So we've got just a minute left. So any final thoughts before we close out?
Yeah, you can go to ilium.org. I just have a Splash web page up there now. There is a documentation web page that I've put together that I've really put a lot of effort into trying to write in plain English. I think one of the problems with other like cryptocurrencies, I think, is they just don't like explain how things work. Or like I go to the Aleo's website and I wish I could tell you like how it compares to Ilium, but their documentation is like doesn't tell you anything. So and it's just corporate, you know, pseudo-academic nonsense. So, but, you know, even Zcash, which I really like, but like Zcash's documentation was like written for a cryptography journal, basically. So you couldn't read it. So I'm hoping that the documentation is at least readable.
All right, that's time for us. Thanks everyone for participating.